Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing how to create our first Django application with a very simple view. So far, we've been able to use run server to test our installation of Django. Now let's move on to actually creating our first Django application. We'll learn about views and how to use them. Let's get some terminology straight though before we continue. A Django project is a collection of applications and configurations that when combined together is going to make up the full web application or website. That's your complete website running with Django. A lot of times people use the term web application to describe a website, so try not to get it confused with a Django application. A Django application is created to perform a particular functionality for your entire web application. So for example, you could have a registration Django application or a polling Django application, a comments Django application. So a polling app, comments app, etc. These Django apps or Django applications can then be plugged into other Django projects, so you can reuse them, or more importantly, use other people's Django applications. This process of being able to take a Django application and plug it into another Django project leads to the terminology of pluggable Django applications. Okay, let's continue on by creating a simple application with the following command. We'll go back and use that manage.py file. We're going to be using it a lot throughout the course, and we'll say Python manage.py start app and then first_app. So within our Django project, we're creating a Django application. I'm going to jump to Atom to get started. Alright, here I am back at the Atom text editor. And right now I'm located under the first project directory, that top level directory. And you'll notice we also get this db.sqlite3 when we ran our server from last time. We can just let it be for now and ignore it. What we want to do is with our virtual environment activated, actually create that first simple Django application. So what I'm going to type is Python manage.py, and then the keyword here is start app, and then whatever you want to call this first application. Since we're doing something really basic like a hello world type app, I'm just going to say first_app. Hit enter, and you'll notice that we now get this first app inside of our first project directory. So this is a Django application. You'll see that it looks kind of similar to what we had when we actually ran our first project, but we get some different files here. We get views, tests, models, apps, admin, and init. Let's discuss what all of these files stand for and how they all work. I'm going to jump back to the presentation now. Okay, so we created all those files with that start app command. Now let's discuss what all these files are for. Here we have another init.py file, and that's serving the exact same purpose as we discussed previously. It's just a blank Python script that, due to its special name, lets Python know that this directory can be treated as a package. Then we have the admin.py, and this is where you can register your models so that you can benefit from some Django machinery that basically creates an admin interface for you. And later on we'll see how fantastic the built-in admin features of Django are. It's a really powerful tool, and it's all built into Django. Then we have the apps.py file, and that essentially provides a place for any application-specific configuration. Then we have the models.py, and this is going to be a place to store your application's data models. And that's where you're going to specify the entities and relationships between the data. And that will make a lot more sense when we actually begin to play with that file. Then we have the test.py file, and this is where you can store a series of functions to test out your application's code. Then we have views.py, which is where you can store a series of functions that handle requests and return responses. Then finally, we have that migrations directory or migrations folder. And this directory stores database-specific information as it relates to the models. So the views.py and the models.py are the two files you're going to be using for any given application. And the form part of that main architectural design pattern employed by Django is the model view template pattern. And you can check out the official Django documentation to see how models, views, and templates all relate to each other in a lot more detail. But before we get started with any of this, we actually need to tell Django that we just created this application. We need to let it know that first_app actually exists. So what we'll do is go back to the settings.py file of our project and add in that first app. Then once Django knows about the application's existence, we can learn the process of creating a view and mapping it to our URL to complete this entire process. Let's jump back to the Atom text editor and do all of these tasks. Okay, here I am back at Atom text editor, and what I want to do is check out this settings.py that was created when we first created our project. And again, these are the Django settings for the first project. If we scroll down, we'll see a bunch of variables. The one we're looking for is called installed apps. And here they are. We see installed apps, and it's essentially what a list is with some string application definitions. And what we need to do is add in our own application, this first underscore app. You can see here that Django automatically adds its own default apps like authorization, administration apps, messages, etc., static files, all of which we're going to be discussing in future lectures. But right now, let's add in as a string that application we just created, which is first underscore app. And then what we will do is save this. I can just do Control S to save that, and that's saved. And with Atom, what's nice is there'll be a little blue dot here to let you know that you haven't saved it yet. To make sure all of this actually worked, we're just going to run the server again one more time and make sure we have no errors. So I will say Python space manage.py and then select that run server command. Hit enter, and as long as I don't get any errors, then everything should be working fine. I can just copy and paste this into a browser. Whoops, looks like I did Control C, which makes sense. Let's run that again, and I should right click this. So highlight that, copy it, and I'm going to input it into a browser and make sure it's working. And you can see here that I've input it into a browser on my other screen. I'm going to drag it over real quick, and we see that everything is still working. Good. That means the first app is working fine on the installed apps, so I will do Control C to exit out of that. The next step that we want to do is actually create a view. So now that our first application has been created, what we can do is create a simple view. And for our very first view, we're going to just send back some simple text, like a hello world. We won't concern ourselves with actually using models or templates just yet. We're going to discuss that in a future lecture. So what we will do is open up the views.py right here, and this is under our, let me minimize this. This is under our application folder. So we have views.py, and it says from django.shortcuts import render. What we need to do is add in a little bit of code here. We also need to say from django.http import http response. And then I'm going to create a function called index, and that's going to take in request. And then it's going to return HTTP response, and I'm just going to pass in a string here that says hello world. Okay, so let's discuss line by line what's actually happening here. First, we had to import HTTP response object from the Django.http module. And then each view for this application is going to exist within that views.py file as its own individual function. And in this instance, we just created one view called index with that index function. And each view is also going to take in at least one argument. And for that HTTP request object, since it lives inside that Django HTTP module, by convention, we usually call this the request. But again, you could actually just call this whatever you want. This could be jelly donut as a variable. It really wouldn't matter. But by convention, we call it request. And you'll notice that regardless of what is passed into this function, it returns HTTP response and then this text, hello world. So each view must return an HTTP response object. And this very simple response object just is going to take in a string parameter representing the content of the page. So what I could also do is pass in some HTML in there, which we'll show later on. In order for us to actually see this view when we're running our server, what we have to do is map this view to the urls.py file. So I will open up here, first underscore project, and jump here to the urls.py and open that up. And you see here it tells you some information. It actually tells you what to do. So If you want to add an import, you say from my app import views, which is exactly what we're going to do, except in this case, it's not my app, it's first app. So I'm going to scroll down here, and you'll notice what is essentially looking like a list of function calls to URL, and I'm going to add in one more over here, and I will say call this URL function, and this is where it's going to look a little weird because we're using some regular expressions, so you may want to review those as we go along, but we'll just say our single apostrophe there, or single quote, and then that little caret symbol, or chevron it's also called, and then another single quote. And sometimes Atom will automatically post a double quote there, so just delete it. So that's the first argument. It's a regular expression, and we'll explain what that actually means in a second. And then we need to pass in the views.index. But what I need to do is say this: from first app import views. So what is that actually doing? It's saying, okay, from that first app folder, import this views.py. And that means here, I can say views dot, and then call that index function, which remember that index function is inside here, views.py. So that's exactly what's happening here. I'm just saying, okay, from that first app folder, grab views, and then from views, I can call index. And then I will name this. That's the third argument. I will just say name is equal to index. And remember to put in a comma here to finish off that list. So what this is doing is it's actually mapping that application's view to this URL. So I'm going to save this. Okay, with that saved, let's actually test out to see if this worked by running our server again. And then after that, in the next lecture, we're going to discuss URL mapping in a lot more detail and other ways of doing it. So I'm going to come back up here and say python manage.py run server, hit enter, and then in my browser I'm going to jump back to this URL. I'm going to just copy this, put it in my browser, and then let's see if it worked. And you should be doing the same thing. And hopefully, if everything worked correctly for you, if I bring in my browser, you should see something that says hello world or whatever text you happen to put into that particular view. All right. So we just created our first Django application, very simple hello world, but we were able to create that application, create that view, and actually map it to the URL in the urls.py file. Okay, so coming up next, we're going to discuss a lot more about urls.py, a little more about URL mapping, and some other ways to do it that are going to be a little more efficient and a little better. Thanks everyone, and I will see you in the next lecture.